All right, so NRCS is stands for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's a sub-agency of the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's kind of got its start back in the 1930s when we were having a lot of soil erosion issues with the Dust Bowl, and so it was originally called the Soil Erosion Service and Soil Conservation Service, I believe, and then finally it's kind of settled on the Natural Resource Conservation Service in order to kind of express what our broader range of concerns above and beyond just soil erosion. So we do a lot of work in general natural resource conservation. I actually work on a partnership position with a nonprofit, the Ruffed Grouse Society, the state agency, the State Conservation Agency, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and then NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Society. NRCS provides landowners with conservation practices, technical assistance, and funding in order to implement some kind of conservation practice to address issues on their land. This could be soil erosion or wildlife habitat, forest health, that sort of thing. So we really have a wide range of practices that are available to your average landowner that they can use to improve their property or to address issues. Okay, so what we're looking at here is an aspen patch clear cut, and it actually goes back into our right here around kind of the trees on the right side of us here for about 5 acres. And in the back here you can see some older age class aspen, as well as a small oak kind of just probably to the right in your screen. And the young aspen here are about 3 to 4 years old, and this is designed to both harvest the timber products. We're standing on county forest land right now, but also to improve wildlife habitat. So this mix of aspen age classes combined with some hard mast from the oaks as well as soft mast from the shrubs in the area, there's several behind us here, provide high quality habitat for a variety of times of year during that grouse's life cycle. And it's really important to have that interspersed age class diversity because just having a large block of aspen with only one age class doesn't provide the level of quality that multiple age class blocks provide. So the two primary ones that I work with, and the two most common ones that have the most available funding, are EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. You can think of EQIP kind of as a problem solution program. So in NRCS lingo, you have a resource concern on your property, and we have a conservation practice to address that resource concern. So an example of resource concerns may be soil erosion, right? That's kind of the classic. NRCS was designed to help address soil erosion. So if you have a crop field that has erosion, we might have a grassed waterway to go on that. In a forestry standpoint, if we're talking about forest landowners, you might have an overdense woodlot that needs to be thinned, but you don't have a management plan and you've never conducted a harvest. So we can help you write a management plan and then provide funds to go and pay a professional forester to come in and select which of these trees are going to be harvested. Similarly, if you're more interested in wildlife habitat, something like maybe pollinators, monarch butterflies, we have pollinator planting practices, and also things like patch clear cuts for species like golden-winged warbler that are typically not or maybe wouldn't be commercially viable without the financial assistance, but also benefit game species like ruffed grouse and woodcock. So the Conservation Stewardship Program is kind of it's a two-parter. So it's a 5-year contract, and part of the payment for that, part of the financial assistance, is a base payment that's designed to help support the good work that a landowner is already doing. So that scales based on the quality of your property and the quality of your past management. And then the hook for that, right, because there's always a hook. The hook is that you bite off one more best management practice. And so we call those enhancements. And in order to qualify for the program, you have to do at least one enhancement. And we have basically most types of conservation practices, at least that you would consider that you've seen someone else do, we probably have some version of that available through CSP. So the popular ones are tree planting, pollinator planting, or conservation cover. We also do some patch clear cuts, edge feathering in order to smooth the transition between, let's say, a hard edge between a field where you have flat corn or a crop, and then boom, we have a tree wall and we go up, so you can come in and feather that edge so it's a more gradual transition, which is good for all kinds of species. It's been a popular one this year. We also do some snag and den tree enhancements, especially if you had a woodlot where you've done a lot of firewood cutting in the past. You might not have a lot of dead trees, and those can provide really, really important homes basically for things like flying squirrels, different kinds of bats, woodpecker habitat, and very, very important for secondary cavity nesting species that there are a whole lot of. So having those on the landscape can be important, and those are kind of some of the popular enhancements in CSP. So CSP, then the payment comes in two parts too. There's a minimum $1,500 annual base payment that's part of each of those 5 years of the contract, and then you're also given a smaller subsidy basically to implement that enhancement practice. So overall, it's a good program to get in, and it can really help you make a lot of change on your property in a hurry because of that base payment. No, there isn't really a limit to the number of programs you can be involved in or the number of practices that you can do. But some programs are going to work more in sequence, where some might work better in tandem, and some practices may be sequential. So what you do when is really determined by what the opportunity is on your property and what's available in each of the programs. To give you an example of how this might work, the DNR has a program called MFL, it's the Managed Forest Law Program. It provides a tax subsidy for landowners that enroll acreage over 20 continuous acres and agree to manage it under a DNR approved management plan. There's some other little details there, but generally you just have to do essentially management under this plan. So the Environmental Quality Incentives Program can also provide funding to write a management plan that you can use to enroll in MFL. And then in order to get into the Conservation Stewardship Program, you have to have some kind of forest stewardship plan, whether that's through MFL or not. So you can use all of these programs in sequence, or you could use EQIP and MFL at the same time in order to achieve whatever your conservation objectives are, depending on your exact situation on your property. Yeah, so the actual eligibility is pretty simple. Our sister agency, the Farm Service Agency within the USDA, maintains our eligibility database. And if you are a forest landowner that hasn't worked with NRCS before, you may have to do maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes worth of paperwork and just kind of a general meeting to go over those eligibility requirements. If you already have ag land, if you're a farmer as well as a forest landowner, you've been working with crop insurance or something like that, you probably already have all the eligibility paperwork taken care of because you're already using USDA programs. So that can be a very simple process, or it can be a little more involved, but generally it's not very difficult. As far as application periods go, we don't have what you would think of as a traditional, like, oh, you have an application deadline. We take applications year-round. You can come in anytime, turn in an application for EQIP or CSP, but we do have what are called batching dates. And basically we take all the applications that we've gotten in the last period and we work on those until set deadline. And so if you come in at the back end right after a batching deadline, you might be waiting for a while until your application is actually worked on. But you can come in and you can apply anytime. So in terms of how long it's going to take before we have success or before we see results, it really entirely depends on how we define success and how we define results, right? So if you're a landowner and you're out there planting oak trees, you might not have acorns yet in your lifetime. That might be something. Success is totally defined on how that affects your legacy and how your grandchildren are able to enjoy the property. On the flip side, if we're talking about a pollinator habitat, maybe we're putting in a plot for honeybees, you might be harvesting honey in 5 months, right? So really what conservation practices we're talking about and what timeline that kind of intrinsically has is going to define what our timeline for success looks like. In terms of timelines to use the program, those are generally long, right? People come in and they might expect that we're going to be able to do something right away, like, oh, it's February and we're going to be planting in March or something, or March or April. And generally speaking, the timelines for these are a little longer than that. So I tell people generally figure between 12 and 18 months between coming in, filling out that eligibility paperwork, and turning in an application and actually being able to implement the first project. If we're talking about something like CSP where it's a 5-year contract, we might not have something scheduled till the 3rd year of that contract, and so we'll have some time in the front while we're kind of in the application phase, then you get funded, and we'll have the start of that 5 years. We might be looking at 4 years from when you walked in the door between when we start that practice. So it really depends on what your situation is in terms of what the timeline looks like, and generally I would say expect between coming in and turning in an application and getting those results on the ground, or implementing that conservation practice, you're looking at probably 12 to 18 months. That also assumes that you get funded right away, and because all of NRCS's funding is competitive, we have a ranking system, and you'll be eligible for a certain fund pool. Your application will go in that fund pool. It'll have a ranking score, and we'll fund all the way down the list until we run out of money in that fund pool, basically. So if you don't make the cutoff the first year, we'll roll you over Basically, we'll defer your application until the next year, and hopefully you'll get funded then. But that can sometimes take, depending on what the priority of your project is in NRCS's ranking system, sometimes that can take a year or two to get funded. All of NRCS's financial assistance is competitive. So both the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, are competitive programs. You are competing with people either in your kind of county area, maybe a 2 or 3 county area, or at the statewide level for that funding. And sometimes this means that you might be in the hopper a couple of years before you get selected for funding. DMAP is a really good program. The one issue you run into is that through EQIP, almost all of our conservation practices require some kind of forest stewardship plan. Commonly, that's a landowner that's also enrolled in MFL, so they have an MFL plan that's signed off on by the DNR. But there's also plenty of private foresters that write a forest stewardship plan, and NRCS has their own little template of forest stewardship plan. And so if you're going to apply for any kind of a practice really on forest land, you need to have that minimum. We have a plan with some goals and some conservation practices laid out in a rough timeline of what's going to happen when. DMAP plans do a good job laying out the wildlife habitat side of things, but a lot of times they don't have a detailed enough forestry information in the plan for a landowner to be able to interface that directly into the EQIP program. So they might need an additional forest stewardship plan or an addendum of some sort in order to be able to qualify for funding through EQIP. But it's very common to have landowners use NRCS programs that are involved in the DMAP program, just because they're often very engaged in trying to make wildlife habitat quality better, and we have a lot of funding available for wildlife habitat practices, as well as a lot of conservation practices that are geared towards increasing wildlife habitat.